This episode of the Officer Down Memorial Podcast is sponsored in part by Law Enforcement Labor Services in Minnesota.
Law Enforcement Labor Services, also known as LELS, is Minnesota's largest public safety labor union, with over 7,000 Minnesota public safety members serving in all areas of public safety. Law enforcement, 911 dispatch centers, corrections, public safety administrative support personnel, and firefighters. Established in 1977, LELS serves over 260 different public safety agencies and over 450 locals across the state of Minnesota. With their administration, general counsel, 3 staff attorneys, and 14 business agents, LELS provides contract negotiations for better wages and benefits, grievance processing and representation, discipline representation, mediation and arbitration, assistance with representation for post-board hearings, and in-line of duty death benefits for survivor families. Find out more about law enforcement labor services at LELS.org. LELS.org.
Episodes of the Officer Down Memorial Podcast may contain strong language and violent content. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Sheriff Scott Rose from Minnesota, and I'm your host for today's new episode of the Officer Down Memorial Podcast.
Walking eastbound.
In each episode of the Officer Down Memorial Podcast, we'll share the details and the stories of how these men and women heroically lost their lives in the line of duty. Our mission is to help ensure their service and sacrifice is never forgotten. Thanks for spending some time with me today to remember and honor these fallen heroes.
There it is, 11 seconds.
11
There'll be
seconds
no
to go.
knockout, that's for sure. There never was going to be one. 8-7. That is about it, folks. It's all over.
Ali is the world heavyweight champion for the 3rd time, and here comes the Ali Circus.
Muhammad Ali became the first fighter to win the world heavyweight boxing title 3 times.
Ali is still. Please. All right, there's the ring announcing.
As mayor of the city, what is your assessment of the situation in Rochester?
Well, it's very dramatic. It's the worst flood we've ever had in the history of the city of Rochester. And it's difficult to go ahead and assess the damage itself, but I would say that the damages to the homes and to the businesses will run into the probably $30-40 million. I would say.
The southeast Minnesota community of Rochester experienced the worst flooding in its city's history this year, with storms dumping 6 to 7 inches of rain in just a few hours, causing area rivers to swell and pushing the Zumbro River in Rochester to crest to almost 12 feet above flood stage, leaving over a quarter of the city underwater. The blockbuster hit Grease was released in theaters on this year, starring John Travolta as Danny Zuko and Olivia Newton-John as Sandy Olsen at Rydell High.
Everybody! We're doing Kinnicky made up!
All right!
Oh, look! All the gang's together! Well, what are we going to do after graduation? Yeah! Maybe we'll never see each other again.
The year was 1978. Located in the west central part of the state, Douglas County was home to around 27,000 people back in 1978. The county is also home to more than 250 lakes, including a chain of 9 interconnected lakes. So tourism is a huge industry in this beautiful rural Minnesota community. With Interstate 94 traveling through the county from southeast to northwest, it's a weekend destination spot for thousands from the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area. The county seat is the city of Alexandria, which is often referred to as the heart of Lake Country in west central Minnesota. Bill Ingebrigtsen, a retired Douglas County sheriff, was serving as a deputy for the county back then.
Well, Alexandria is a beautiful community in west central Minnesota, Douglas County, and it lives between Fargo and the Twin Cities on I-94. as the slogan says, easy to get to, hard to leave. It's just a wonderful place to be in west central Minnesota. We have lots of, it's roly-poly type terrain, but it's beautiful. It's a regional. It's a regional hub for a lot of things, medical for sure, groceries and whatnot. They come from miles around, and again, Fargo's 100 miles and St. Cloud is 70 miles to the east. So we consider ourselves a regional hub, but we're also not only a vacation spot, but people want to come out here and retire. And guess what? They want to be the last one to retire in the county, as we all know.
The Alexandria area has over 250 lakes, so tourism is extremely important to this community, with activities all year round, from water sports, fishing and biking in the summer, to snowmobiling and ice fishing in the winter. Their chain of lakes includes 11 lakes connected by channels, allowing boaters to navigate between them without having to portage their watercraft.
The lakes really bring people. I mean, it really does. And we have some beautiful county parks now, and one of them just happens to be, two of them actually be on the chain of the lakes here. So a lot of people are out there in their pontoons. They'll moor themselves to the shore, and they'll spend the whole afternoon out there, and it's been just wonderful. We're known for Big Ole. If anybody knows Big Ole, he's the guy that stands on the end of Broadway.
Big Ole is a 28-foot-tall Viking statue located in Alexandria's Big Ole Central Park. It's a symbol of Alexandria's Viking pride. Folks there refer to Douglas County as the birthplace of America. You see, in 1898, a runestone was discovered in a field southwest of Alex near the small city of Kensington. It was a 200-pound slab of sandstone bearing runic inscriptions that claimed to be record of a 14th century Norse exploration of this area. They call it the Kensington Runestone and date it back to 1392. 100 years before Christopher Columbus landed in America, and it's on display in the Runestone Museum just a block or so south of Ole. Researchers and scholars from around the world have long debated the authenticity of the runestone and how a runic artifact dated 1362 could show up in North America in Minnesota. Those arguing for its authenticity point to the historical context of the Scandinavian settlement in the region and the language of the inscription. Those arguing against its authenticity cite linguistic inconsistencies and a lack of archaeological evidence. Locals, well, they'll tell you nobody's proved yet that it's not authentic, so they continue to call their home the birthplace of America. Alex is also home to Alexandria Technical and Community College, one of the top-rated community colleges in the state. And as the county seat, Alexandria serves as the home for the Douglas County Sheriff's Office.
With the sheriff, there were 7 full-time deputies that I recall. 7 full-time deputies. One of them was a chief deputy. There were actually 3 sergeants and only 2 of us that weren't sergeants on the road. But we had about 7 or 8 jailer dispatchers. And we did have a 24-hour service, but it was spread pretty thin, and in the evenings, you a lot of times would come on and end up working alone in 20 townships. You were in charge of responding to the calls, and some days you were by yourself, and your backup just wasn't there. I mean, it was so far away, it really didn't matter. So it made a very good officer. You learned how to talk. Your talking was your best tool on your belt, next to your gun and lights and all that stuff. Your verbal skills were honed in real well because you were all alone, no matter what you were facing. So yeah, it was an interesting era. We only had a local county jail where the sheriff lived in the living quarters and the jail was in the back, and we'd actually have to get the sheriff up and in the middle of the night to put somebody in there for drunk driving, and he'd have to come and open the door, and we'd take his belongings and put them in the bag and put them in the cell, lock the door, and he wouldn't be seen or heard of till morning when the wife decided she was going to serve him breakfast. So back then, I suppose we'd have been able to hold maybe up to 10 or 12. It was Barney Fife days, the old days.
In addition to patrol and the jail, the sheriff's office also provides water patrol on their numerous lakes in the spring, summer, and fall, and snowmobile patrol throughout their vast snowmobile trails in the winter months. Among those 7 deputies serving with Bill was 23-year-old Curtis Allen Felt. Curt was a local. He was a 1973 Jefferson Senior High graduate, son of Mr. and Mrs. Hermanfelt of Alexandria. Although he had no law enforcement in his family, he was drawn to it and did hours and hours of ride-alongs with the county.
Curt was the guy that wanted to be a cop. I mean, there was just no question about it. I kind of like myself, I guess. I grew up with it. Curt did not. His dad was a banker here in town, but he really liked law enforcement. He rode with me countless hours, along with other deputies. And Curt was you could just almost count on him. He's going to be riding with tonight, here, around we go and around we go before he was hired. So he just absolutely loved it. He loved being around law enforcement, and he knew very well he was going to pursue that, and he did.
Curt attended Alexandria Vocational Technical Institute, completing his law enforcement degree in 1975, and got hired by the Douglas County Sheriff's Office. Curt would be introduced by Bill and his wife Marilyn to a local young lady by the name of Donna Kittleson, who was a nurse working with Marilyn.
At the time, Bill and Marilyn lived in Glenwood, and Marilyn was a nurse, and we were all, we worked at the same facility, and then they moved to Alec because Bill got a job, with the sheriff's office up here. Well, then I was still working in Glenwood, and then they told me that they wanted me to meet this. Marilyn said, "We want you to meet this guy." And I said, "Oh, okay."
Curt and Donna were a perfect match.
Well, I found him to be just really a neat person. He loved the outdoors. He was building, his own home outside of Alexandria. So he was in the process of that. Had, gotten his property. It was a wooded area. So, he had cleared the land and everything. And, so he was working on that. He loved football, hockey, baseball, the sports. He loved the lakes. He was on water patrol. He loved law enforcement. I mean, he was just a very neat person. Fun loving, and, I would always, you would kind of tease one another. And then when we had decided that we were going to be married, I said, I will not be changing my name. I had this serious look on my face, and he goes, "Oh, really? Why is that?" And then, of course, you just start to laugh about the whole situation. So, yeah.
Curt and Donna were married in November of 1977. Bill and Marilyn were in the wedding, too. Bill would be Curt's best man, and Marilyn was Donna's maid of honor. Curt was living the dream. He was building a house. He was married to the love of his life, Donna. And he was blessed enjoying the first couple years of his law enforcement career in the very community he grew up in and loved. Just before Christmas that same year, just weeks after they were married, Curt and another deputy were informed they were being laid off due to lack of work. This was in November of that same year, just weeks after Curt and Donna were married.
There was a work short. It was called a work shortage layoff, I believe, and I think there was a little bit of a political discourse, if you will, between the sheriff and he and another deputy. And when it came to being the work shortage, of course, he was one that was laid off. He fought it, and he recovered his job right away, fairly quickly after that. Yeah, there was a little dust up there about internal politics that there was a shortage at the time. We were building a jail, but we tore down the old jail, and you didn't need as many jailer dispatchers, for instance, and that's what happened. And as it turns out, the union said no, that wasn't going to happen. There was no shortage of work for sure, and he was put back on. So
it was Thursday, June 29th, 1978. It was a beautiful June day in west central Minnesota. Sunny and warm, a light breeze, and a high of 79 degrees predicted in Alexandria. Bill and his family were headed to the lake.
We were out on Lake Carlos in our chain of the lakes north of Alexandria, and we had taken Curt's two brothers. They were twin brothers, quite a bit younger than him. We were taking skiing, and we were celebrating my daughter's 4th birthday. And of course, she and another friend were along, and we were just going to go out and do what we did an awful lot. We did a lot of water sports. And before that, it's kind of interesting. We were at my house, and we were sitting sitting there just getting ready to go and getting kids all lined up, and Curt drove up the driveway behind my house. He got up and got about halfway to the house. He put the radio to his mouth, and you could tell that he'd gotten a call. So he seen us in the windows. He turned around, waved, and went back to the squad car and went to the sheriff's office, and that's where the incident happened. That was the last we seen of him, was coming up in my backyard.
He'd been back for about a month and was working patrol that day when he got a call to head to the courthouse to transport someone who was taken into custody. At the courthouse, cases involving Frank Pfeiffer, Robert A. Carlson, and James Krupa had been heard by the Honorable Judge Paul Ballard. He was actually filling in for the Honorable Judge Richard S. Roberts, who usually presided in Douglas County Court. But he was off that day to a dentist appointment. All three men had been convicted of minor crimes and ordered to pay fines, and all three were ordered to return to court for failing to pay those fines. One of these defendants, James Krupa, had been convicted of a DWI a year earlier. Judge Ballard ordered the three men to pay their fines immediately or face 30 days in jail for contempt. When Pfeiffer said he could get the money, both Carlson and Krupa told the judge they were unable to pay their fines. Judge Ballard found both in contempt, and he released them to the sheriff's office. He told Deputy Richard Willey to take the two away to the sheriff's office and allow them some time to raise their fine money. Judge Ballard indicated that maybe by that time Judge Roberts would be back from the dentist and could review the decision he'd made. You see, back then things were very different in the courtroom. Deputies were not allowed to carry weapons into the courtroom. It was supposed to be weapon-free for safety. However, there was no security in place to make sure the public and defendants were weapon-free, just the deputies. Also, in cases like this where a defendant was ordered to be taken into custody, they were often not handcuffed.
And at that time, it was very, very open. You didn't handcuff anybody. There was no bailiff there or anything. And he just walked them down to the makeshift office we had when we were building the jail.
Krupa was then seated in a chair in front of Deputy Willey's desk and was told he could use the phone to try and raise his fine money. Krupa was reading his jail paperwork and indicated he wouldn't be able to raise the money due to having too many bills. Then, the phone rang. Deputy Willey answered it and was told by court administration that the judge's order of commitment for contempt would stand. Krupa would be held for 30 days for contempt. Deputy Will then got on the phone with neighboring Ottertail County to determine if there was enough room at the jail for 30 days. Remember, the Douglas County Sheriff's Office and the county were in the middle of building a new jail facility in Alexandria, so they were housing their detainees at Ottertail County Jail, a 50-minute drive up I-94 in the city of Fergus Falls. The jail confirmed they had enough room, and Deputy Willey gave them an ETA of an hour or so. That's when he radioed Deputy Curt Felt to respond to the office for a transport. Curt walked into the sheriff's office and asked if they were ready. Deputy Willey said he was still waiting for the commitment papers. A short time later, court administration advised the paperwork would take a while, so they said to just go ahead and transport the two, and they would mail the commitment papers that day. Carlson, the other one going to jail with Krupa, asked if he could talk to his parents who were sitting in the civil defense room to tell them he was going to jail for a month. Deputy Willey agreed and walked Carlson to his parents. While Carlson was talking with his parents, Deputy Willey was patting him down to get him ready for transport when he heard what sounded like a firecracker in the hallway. Then he heard what he described as a second boom and heard a woman scream. He turned to head back to the sheriff's office and met Krupa going the opposite direction. Krupa was holding a handgun high above his head with his right hand as he ran away from the deputy. Deputy Willey drew his gun and ran after Krupa. The two ran up 2 flights of stairs and then out the courthouse door leading to the south lawn. When Deputy Willey got to the door, he saw Krupa running around to the west side of the courthouse by the flagpole in a crouched position. The deputy ran through the courthouse to the north entrance and got to the north entrance when he saw Krupa running, still crouched down, headed north. Deputy Willey pointed his gun at Krupa and yelled, "Halt!" Krupa slowed down, and when the deputy thought he was going to stop, Krupa then crouched down behind a tree near the sidewalk and pointed his gun towards the deputy in the courthouse. Deputy Willie hesitated to fire, noticing the 3 kids playing in a yard to the left and rear of where Krupa was hiding. Krupa then pulled the trigger, firing into the courthouse entrance wall, approximately 4 to 6 feet from Deputy Willie's head. Deputy Willie backed into the courthouse and turned to instruct people who were gathering at the door to get down. When he turned and looked outside again, Krupa was gone. Deputy Willie then ran back into the sheriff's office and found Curt laying on the floor. This, he said, was the first time he realized what had happened and that it was gunfire that he heard earlier. All law enforcement was notified of the shooting and of the shooter. An ambulance attendant quickly responded with an ambulance at the south entrance of the courthouse. Deputy Willie helped load Curt and then drove the ambulance to the hospital while the attendant did CPR on Curt to try and save him. Witnesses later reported seeing Krupa run to a white pickup truck with a camper on it, get in, and drive south to 7th Avenue and then west. By this time, multiple officers were converging on the scene from both the police department and sheriff's office and were all in search of the white pickup. It wasn't long before Alexandria police officer Steve Kay spotted the pickup on the corner of 6th and Cedar, just 3 blocks from the courthouse. Krupa had fired at least 5 shots at the police car, with 2 bullets hitting Officer Kay's squad car, before Officer Kay returned fire, hitting one of Krupa's tires.
The city police ended up chasing him down about 2 blocks to the north. There's a real dip that goes down into the city ball field there on that particular street. And when Steve Kay, the officer, came over the hill, Krupa was actually set up and was gonna ambush him as soon as he came over the hill, which he did. He shot at him. I know a bullet lodged in the front window of the squad car. Steve laid down in the squad car. Meanwhile, he jumped back in and he took off and went out past the fairgrounds through the white tanks going north towards Lake Darling with the city police, and I think the sheriff was after him at that time as well, because the sheriff was in the back. Sheriff and the deputy were in the back room. They actually heard the incident happen.
Now, Krupa had at least 3 squad cars chasing him. Douglas County Sheriff Norm Salto, Officer Steve Kay, and Alexandria Police Sergeant Lamont Mounston. The pursuit continued on County Road 22, past the Kincaid Cemetery, and straight north on the gravel road towards Lake Darling. Krupa had turned onto a dead-end gravel road, and the officers chasing him knew it. With little control of the vehicle now at high speeds with a flat tire from Kay's shot, Krupa drove straight off the road, down a private driveway belonging to Katie Jennings. Sheriff Salto stopped his squad car right at the entrance to the driveway. However, Alexandria Police Sergeant Mounston steered around the sheriff's squad and chased Krupa right up to the house. Sergeant Mounston's thinking at the time was that he didn't want Krupa to get into the house and that he was worried that people may be there. Katie Jennings and her 15-year-old daughter Peggy had been working on the yard all day and were sitting outside on their deck trying to cool off in the late June heat. When Katie heard a loud rumble, she described it like the sound of a tractor. Then she saw a pickup pull around the corner of the house from the road. She could see it had a flat tire. The pickup stopped about 30 feet from the deck where they were sitting. She watched Krupa get out of the pickup holding a handgun, and he said, "Hi there," to her and her daughter before running to the back end of the truck while the police car was pulling up to the house. Scared, young Peggy got up and ran to the other side of the house. Katie grabbed her dog and huddled against the door to the house. Sergeant Mounston observed Krupa ducking behind a tree and yelled, "Hold it!" Krupa reappeared and fired twice at the sergeant, missing him and hitting one of his squad tires with one of the rounds. Sergeant Mounston shot towards Krupa with his 12-gauge shotgun once before Krupa ducked back behind the tree.
He took a couple shots from Krupa, and he got in behind a tree, and Lamont got his shotgun out, and he pulled around the tree with his right hand, and Lamont shot him in the right hand, and his gun went flying. Then he pulled out another gun because he had 4 guns on him. He pulled out the other gun and came around on the left side. Well, of course, now you got to come out a little further when you're shooting left-handed when you're right-handed. And Lamont expended around and got him immediately. But he was threatening to go towards those other people, and that's why Lamont got out. He's a World War II vet. He was real cool and just a hell of an officer. He got to be Officer of the Year in Minnesota that year for that particular reason.
Krupa was down, and Sergeant Mounston was okay, along with Katie and her daughter Peggy. The running gun battle had lasted 20 minutes. Curt was now in the hospital, fighting for his life, and authorities needed to contact his family to notify them of what happened.
We were out just starting to ski when a good friend of mine came out along with another person. I think her and her husband both came out and said he'd been shot and we should go to the emergency room right away.
I was working as a nurse in Glenwood, and the director of nurses came to me and said there had been an incident and I needed to get up to Douglas County Hospital. And so then the sheriff of Pope County at that time was Ira Emmons. So he came and drove me to the county line, and the chief deputy here was Carl Bloomgren, and he brought me to Douglas County Hospital.
Oh, when I pulled up, it was utter chaos. I mean, we had firemen lined up. They talked about donating blood for Curt that was shot, and they were just all over the place. And the sheriff was there. He was very broke up. We were kind of, trying to console him somewhat. He was very, very taken back by it, and as everybody was, and just stunned. We were just absolutely stunned, and the look of panic and disbelief of this is not supposed to happen in Alexandria. This is a small town.
That was so crowded. It was so confusing. And, you would see people, crying, and you really didn't know. And all I was told that he was in the operating room, and it was Dr. Miracle, who was our surgeon, and he was a fantastic surgeon. And I remember seeing Pastor Larson, who I really didn't know that well, but I just asked him, I said, can we just go to the chapel? And we did. And anyhow, I said to him that, I said, I'm very afraid. And Pastor Larson was very honest with me and said, he said, there is a possibility that he might not make it. And of course, I looked at him and I could not believe that he said that to me. But, he was in surgery, I believe it was for about 3.5 hours. And of course, they just couldn't keep up. They just could not save him.
Curt had been shot in the abdomen and in the wrist, and the round he took in the abdomen did a lot of damage internally, and doctors just couldn't control his internal bleeding. After everything the deputy and ambulance did to get Curt to the hospital, and after over 3 hours of surgery, the doctors did everything they could. Curt Felt died from his injuries that night. Being a small community, both Curt and the man who murdered him were both being treated at the same hospital. Curt died within a few hours. Krupa, who had been sent from their local hospital to University of Minnesota hospitals in Minneapolis, would die 3 days later from his injuries. During the investigation, authorities determined that Krupa had carried concealed 4 loaded weapons into the courtroom, 2 9mm pistols tucked in his belt, a .25 caliber semi-automatic in his pocket, and a .357 in his boot. Krupa went to court with all of this firepower when he knew he was being held in contempt for a simple DWI arrest. According to the autopsy, Curt died from internal hemorrhage and shock secondary to the gunshot wounds. Curt was survived by his wife Donna, his parents Herman and Darlene Felt of Alexandria, and twin brothers Michael and Stephen Felt at home. He was preceded in death by a baby sister, Linda Ann, and his grandparents. Curt's funeral was held at the Alexandria Calvary Lutheran Church in front of over 300 uniformed officers and hundreds of mourners, family, and friends. Over 90 squad cars were parked outside the church and helped escort Curt to his final resting place at Kincaid Cemetery in Sunset Memorial Park, Alexandria. Bill was one of Curt's pallbearers.
It was a very, very large funeral, not only police but locally, because everybody knew the Felt family here in town, and again, that wasn't supposed to happen, and it was a tremendous outpour. I remember the preacher. He was very outspoken, very loud, and he was very, very angry about why would this happen to such a young man, and so it was quite a memorable, I guess. Memorable, but again, you kind of block some of that stuff out too, it seems like. So
Bill was also asked and given the honor of pinning Curt's badge on him.
What really stuck with me was the funeral home asking me to come and pin the badge on him because he was buried in his uniform. So I did that. His officer number was retired. It was 207. Mine happened to be 206. So I was there and put the badge on him, and that still really sticks out in my mind, having to do that, and I certainly didn't mind doing that at all.
I do not remember hardly anything of the funeral. It's kind of like a blur in my mind. I know there was many law enforcement there, family, friends, and the only thing that I can remember sitting during this service is I looked over at my dad and he was crying. And that's the first time that I ever saw my dad cry.
A grand jury was convened and reviewed the case, listening to more than a dozen witnesses before taking just 5 minutes to determine and rule that Alexandria Police Sergeant Lamont Mounsden's action in shooting James Krupa was justified under Minnesota law. Sergeant Mounsden was a 24-year veteran of the Alexandria Police Force. Curt was a local kid. He grew up in this community. He started serving his community, working at Northland's ambulance service as a teen before going to college. He wasn't following in his father's footsteps. There was no family legacy of law enforcement service. Curt simply felt the calling to serve, not because of the money, certainly not because of the great hours or stress-free work environment, but because he was drawn to serve, to help his community, to do his little part to help make their community a little better and a little safer for his family and his friends. Curt was that guy that every agency wanted on their team, the one that everyone could rely on, the one that you knew would do things right, and most importantly, be fair to everyone. Bill, who served 4 terms as sheriff in Douglas County, believed Curt would have been sheriff someday, had his career not been cut so short.
He was a people person. He could get along with people well. He cared about people, and it was very clear that Curt was a young, aspiring deputy, and I said someday Curt was going to be the sheriff in Douglas County. There was no question in my mind. That's just the kind of person he was.
Curt was shot and killed, not because of who he was, but because of what he was. He was a cop. He was that cop that day standing between Krupa and jail. In a county that had never lost a deputy, in a city that had never lost an officer, this sudden and tragic loss left this community saddened and stunned. Law enforcement didn't know what Krupa's intentions were. Frankly, they never will. What they do know is authorities discovered additional ammunition clips and a loaded pipe bomb in his truck. They also found more weapons and tear gas in his trailer. Krupa was obviously struggling. He was not in his right mind, and he was willing to hurt or kill anyone who got in his way. When he shot Curt and ran out of that courthouse, Curt's partners, his friends, his fellow deputies, and fellow officers working that day weren't going to let Krupa get away. They'd never dealt with violence like this before, yet they were certainly not going to let him hurt anyone else again. Curt's sacrifice ultimately stopped whatever violence Krupa was planning or was capable of. Curt's death saved others from the same fate, and there's no telling how many lives his selfless sacrifice affected and influenced moving forward. Donna moved on with her life. She had to. She relied on her faith, on her family, and on her friends to help get her through this new chapter, this new journey as a law enforcement survivor spouse. Donna never remarried, But she focused on helping her community, on serving her community as a nurse for 35 years before retiring in 2015. Bill, who along with his wife helped set up Curt and Donna in the beginning, and he was best man at his wedding, would never have imagined 7 months later he would be a pallbearer at Curt's funeral. Bill worked his way up the ranks and ran for sheriff. He was elected in 1990. During his tenure as sheriff, Bill felt the need for a long-term memorial to honor Curt's service and sacrifice.
We were going to put a memorial in front of the courthouse, and there was a lot of discussion about the courthouse. You know, had a couple different statues there, and they didn't want to disrupt that. So I worked with the county board, and the county board was gracious enough to name a park after Curt, just north of Alexandria. A small park. It was a small park at the time. It still is the same size, but people use it all the time. A deputy sheriff. There was a mason. He grew up a mason for his father. He actually built this monument and embossed a picture of Curt and his dog. He took a picture of a dog in uniform. He was not a canine officer, but he did have his dog that he loved, and that was the picture. It's still there. I mean, I was there just 2 days ago. My wife and Donna put flowers out there every year.
Because of his efforts, the Three Haven Park was renamed Curt Felt Memorial Park in Curt's memory. The park was officially rededicated in his memory on Memorial Day in 1999. Curt was also honored and remembered by Minnesota Governor Ruby Perpich.
Then the governor of Minnesota was Ruby Perpich, and then he had us down the Felt family, and then it was also Bonnie Olson, you know, her husband, his family down to the Capitol for a dinner and that. And then we were awarded a plaque. That was really neat. I mean, it was neat for the governor to do something like that.
Bonnie Olson was the widow of East Grand Forks police officer Kenneth Olson, who was shot and killed just under a month after Curt in northwest Minnesota. Curt was one of 5 law enforcement heroes in Minnesota who would pay the ultimate sacrifice for their communities in 1978. Heroes like Curt Felt, those who served and died keeping their communities safe. We can never, ever forget their service and sacrifice.
I would like people to remember him as a kind, loving man, young man who gave his life way too soon for the people that he loved. I mean, he really loved to work in Douglas County, and he just loved to be able to serve people, and he was a very loving husband, a great friend, and it's just something that we just cannot forget about. We just can't forget about those that are out there every night putting their life on the line, and unfortunately, once in a while, they're the ones that are going to take the brunt of the evil out there, and God bless them. That's all I can say is God bless Curt, and God bless any and everybody that follows in his footsteps, because without them, we'd be in trouble, big trouble.
I asked Donna about not getting married again after all these years.
Nope, haven't found anybody. And, you know, the funniest thing is one time Marilyn Ingerbritsen and I were talking, and I said to Marilyn, Marilyn, I said, the thing is, I said, you look back at, when we were all that much younger, and I said, that's how we remember Curt. But I said, you and I both know that we've changed a little bit. And so we always go, forever young, and how true that is.
Curt will remain forever young. Yet his life and his service and his dedication continues to influence and make a difference. His younger brothers, twins Steve and Mike, were only 7 years old when he was killed, and both followed in Curt's footsteps. Steve serving his career as a deputy for the Otter Tail County Sheriff's Office, and Mike serving his career as a deputy for the Carver County Sheriff's Office in Minnesota. Curt's parents, Herman and Darlene, served on the board of directors for the Minnesota Law Enforcement Memorial Association, the state association that honors all Minnesota fallen and supports their survivor families year after year. Curt's murder would also bring up changes within courtroom security. and the introduction of bullet-resistant vests to deputies serving in the community that he called home. Men and women like Curt who choose to serve do so because of their love of family, their love of community, and the need, the calling to help others. While we work to remember and honor those who serve, we often forget about those behind that hero. You see, when a man or woman takes up this calling to serve and commits their life to their community, they aren't the only ones making the commitment, making the sacrifices for our neighborhoods, for our safety. Their families are making this commitment as well. And when a hero pays the ultimate sacrifice, that sacrifice never ends for the families and friends left behind. Survivor spouses like Donna Felt and Curt's parents, Herman and Darlene, friends like Bill and Marilyn Ingebrigtsen. It's sacrifices like this that remind us the importance of not only showing our support and appreciation to our local officers serving, but also showing the support to the families behind the badge. These sacrifices remind us over and over again how important it is to support these families after they've lost their hero, to make sure they know that their sacrifice will never be taken for granted and that their hero will never be forgotten. Douglas County Sheriff's Deputy Curtis Allen Felt is on the National Law Enforcement Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C., where they honor our nation's fallen heroes each year on May 15th. Curt is also remembered annually at the Minnesota Law Enforcement Memorial Program at the state capitol in St. Paul and locally in Douglas County. We encourage you to check out Curt's memorial page on our website at www.officerdownmemorialpodcast.com. His agency, friends, and family have shared pictures and newspaper articles. Curt's story reminds us of the tremendous risks the men and women who wear the badge face day and night. How our officers can be unknowingly put into situations where, like in Curt's case, all of the training in the world may not be enough to protect them. It reminds us of the fear that their families bear every day their hero walks out the door and says goodbye. The daily fear that they may never see their heroes again. A fear that is always in the back of their minds. Curt's story reminds us we have to support these survivor families. These families believed in being involved in something bigger than themselves. They believed in community. They believed in service before self. They believed in sacrificing for the greater good of their communities. And many of these families, like the Felt family, did just that. And while Curt will stay forever young, like Donna said, his family's sacrifice, his wife's sacrifice, it's also forever. Thank you for supporting your local law enforcement and their families. They need to hear and see your support now more than ever. And thank you for taking some time to listen and learn about Douglas County Deputy Curt Felt. Together, we can help ensure that his service and his sacrifice is never forgotten.
Walking eastbound.
Thank you for spending the time to listen, learn about, and honor the memory of this fallen hero. Make sure you take the time to thank your local law enforcement for their service and their sacrifice. And don't forget to thank their families too. They also sacrifice so much for our safety. It's up to us to help ensure the sacrifices made by these fallen heroes and by their families are never forgotten. So please share this podcast with family and friends. Until next time, this is the Officer Down Memorial Podcast. I'm Scott Rose. Thanks for listening.